Tonight, the U.S. intelligence community once again keeping close watch because there are very preliminary signs. Multiple officials tell us that North Korea is moving equipment around. They're not able to tell us exactly what kind of equipment, but it's the kind of thing that is making them watch for the possibility in the coming days or weeks of another missile launch or even a satellite launch. It's simply too soon to say what exactly the North Koreans may be up to. All of this comes at a very sensitive time because the Pentagon also is going to tone it down, we are told, about U.S. military exercises in the region. Very sensitive right now because the Olympics are coming up, because there is a full-out effort to engage in diplomacy in the region. The Chinese, the North Koreans, very sensitive about U.S. military exercises. So look for less talk about all of that, more discreet, not talking about what these exercises, when exactly they're going to happen and what they're going to involve. But that may be risky military strategy in itself because traditionally the U.S. military very much wants to talk about its exercises. It wants to put everybody on notice that when it is doing these exercises, especially near North Korea, it is simply for training, that there are no military operations in the works. And of course, the big unknown, this may be the new strategy, the new policy right now, but will President Trump adopt it or will he engage in his own rhetoric about North Korea, perhaps on Twitter? Brianna?
We call on every nation, including China and Russia, to fully implement UN Security Council resolutions, downgrade diplomatic relations with the regime, and sever all ties of trade and technology.
Just last month, President Trump made an unprecedented 12-day trip to Asia, pushing for a united front against the threat of a nuclear North Korea. But now there are new reports tonight that China's helping the rogue regime, secretly shipping them oil, which violates UN sanctions. Here now, General Anthony Tata, who served in the Army for nearly 30 years before retiring in 2009. He is also the author of the brand new book, Direct Fire. Good to have you here, sir. So China signed on to these sanctions, but China's not abiding by them?
Well, China, normally when they agree with us, they abstain from a UN vote, and now they are trying to put a good face forward on this, Trish, I think. But about a year ago, they had 28% increase in trade with North Korea. And I think they're probably feeling a little bit of the sting, and they're probably funneling things to North Korea that they shouldn't. And they're fighting a proxy war with us through North Korea. They don't want to lose that North Korean buffer between the West and their border.
Okay, so they're basically telling us one thing and then doing another. I mean,
exactly.
I look at the Korean economy, the North Korean economy, $28 billion. It's not huge, but it's grown 3.9% most recently in the last year. And the number one trading partner is China. We now get reports that basically the Chinese have been secretly giving them oil. So doing this trade transaction, if they're growing nearly 4% and their only partner to trade with is China, it means that China is not doing what it promised to do. So how do we go back at China and make them understand?
Well, I think we need to tighten the screws on China now, obviously, diplomatically. You think about fighting a war, and that's what we're doing with North Korea right now. It's just not a hot war. We've got diplomatic, information, military, economic elements of national power. And so what we're trying to do diplomatically was tighten the screws on North Korea and use Russia and China as pliers, to pop them, so to speak. But they're not doing their part, and Russia is not innocent in this thing as well. And so
but we have the purse strings, right? I mean, China doesn't have a lot of economic opportunity without us. We are crucial to China's success. So why don't we go back and say, okay, China, you want to keep trading with North Korea? Well, guess what? You're not going to be able to trade with the people you actually do need to trade with.
Well, I think that's the next step here. When we get verifiable evidence that China is actually not participating in the sanctions, and I think that what we do is we go to China. Well, we're also trying to deal with North Korea, and we go to China with Secretary Tillerson and Department of Treasury, and we go back and say, okay, here's the deal. We're going to crank down on these things that you like about being a trading partner with us, and you're not going to like the way we're moving forward.
You know, General, we sanctioned one Chinese bank, Treasury did, and I think there's a whole host of others that we could sanction as well, because that's the other part of this. Those Chinese banks are doing enough business, somehow filtering this money through the North Koreans as well. So there's a lot of opportunity. I think Treasury could actually do something about this in a pretty big way before we start talking about actual force,
right,
which is, you know, your domain. I think that there's a lot of opportunity, at least on the economic front, for us to do more.
Well, I agree with you, and I think the president's new national security strategy supports exactly what you're just saying. They talk about protection, they talk about the prosperity of Americans. Well, there's a big linkage between prosperity in America and the Chinese economy, and so you have to sort of unpack that a little bit before we go in there, and you got to be very surgical about what we do.
Well, you know, a lot of people tell me, well, the businesses won't like it, American companies
well, there's
will go
a huge
ballistic
second-order
because they don't want
impacts.
to lose this opportunity in
Right.
this huge market. But I keep saying, you know, when it comes down to it, wouldn't we all rather lose dollars than lives?
That's right.
So this is the first opportunity.
That's why in the national security strategy, protection is number one, and then prosperity is number two in President Trump's strategy.
Thank you for the book.
You're welcome.
I look forward to reading it.
U.S. sanctions against North Korea targeting two people the Treasury Department calls key leaders of Kim Jong-un's ballistic missile program, as Russia offers to mediate negotiations with the U.S., while some see any talks as a stalling tactic by the North.
They'll essentially go back to the negotiating table, but we've seen time after time again from the 1990s under Clinton to, you know, I was very close to the six-party talks under Bush from when I served with the vice president, to they essentially use those talks to buy time to continue to develop their program both on the nuclear side and on the ballistic missile side, and have just marched forward to having a fully operational program that can attack anywhere in the world.
Meantime, we are learning there could be new evidence that the rogue nation is planning to use biological weapons. Joining me now, Lanny Chen, Hoover Fellow and former policy director for the Mitt Romney campaign. Thanks, Lanny, for being here. Some pretty disturbing news out of North Korea, and it's never good out of that country, but the possibility that they've been working on anthrax and testing missiles with anthrax warheads?
Right. Well, so we know that back in 2015, Kim Jong-un paid a visit to what was called at the time a pesticide factory. Now, the interesting thing about this is it's very easy for North Koreans, it's very easy actually for any country to flip the switch and go from manufacturing pesticides to manufacturing biological weapons. And so, in fact, a lot of analysts looked at this and said, hey, in fact, we have evidence, credible evidence, that the North Koreans are pursuing some kind of biological weapons capability. And if you add to that the fact that we've got defectors coming over from North Korea to South Korea that test for the anthrax antibody in their bloodstream. In other words, they've either been vaccinated against anthrax or been exposed to the anthrax virus, or anthrax bacteria, rather. This is a very serious situation, John, one that clearly indicates that they mean business.
Some defectors from North Korea are also showing signs of radiation exposure. Talk about what that might mean.
Well, you know, it can mean any number of different things. Of course, it's a little bit inconclusive. It could be the case that they've had exposure to bad air. It could just be manufacturing side effects. Of course, it could also be side effects from exposure to nuclear testing. And so we really don't know exactly what's going on. We do know the North Koreans are committed to having a nuclear program. We know that they're committed to disrupting the peaceful relationships between countries in East Asia. And so they remain probably one of our most significant, if not the most significant, foreign policy threat we face at this point.
I want to take a graphic look at what the North Koreans have been doing in terms of missile launches. In 2012, they launched 4 missiles. 2013, 8, then 18 in 14 and 15, 16 in 2016, and this year so far, 24 missile launches by the North Korean regime. What does that say to you?
Well, it says to me that they want the world to take notice. They want the world to accept the fact in some ways that they have a nuclear capability, that they have the capability to deliver warheads that could damage foreign countries, whether it's Japan or the United States or even our partners in South Korea, and that they're able to do that with relative ease. And so they want the world to see that. So for the United States, it's important for us to continue to maintain the posture, first of all, that they cannot be a nuclear-capable country, that is unacceptable. But second of all, their belligerence is unacceptable in the region. And so the Trump administration has ratcheted up sanctions. They've imposed 7 rounds of sanctions this year already. I think that's the right thing to do, but we've got to keep the pressure on, John.
And the Chinese have suggested that they are on board with the sanctions, but isn't there evidence that the Chinese have also been illegally shipping oil to North Korea?
Yeah, that's right. Look, the Chinese have been bad actors on this for a while. They've been saying one thing and doing another. So it's important that we get the Chinese to work with us. I know President Trump in his meetings with President Xi of China has emphasized the importance of the Chinese coming along with us to contain North Korea. But it's going to be very difficult for us to do so if the Chinese continue to be acting in bad faith. So we do need their help in this situation, and they are going to be critical to peacefully resolving this conflict with North Korea.
Lanny Chen. Lanny, thanks for your insights.
Officials tell us that North Korea is moving equipment around. They're not able to tell us exactly what kind of equipment, but it's the kind of thing that is making them watch for the possibility in the coming days or weeks of another missile launch or even a satellite launch. It's simply too soon to say what exactly the North Koreans may be up to. All of this comes at a very sensitive time because the Pentagon also is going to tone it down, we are told, about U.S. military, perhaps on Twitter. Brianna?
We call on every nation, including China and Russia, to fully implement UN Security Council resolutions, downgrade diplomatic relations with the regime.
Military exercises in the region. Very sensitive right now because the Olympics are coming up, because there is a full-out effort to engage in diplomacy in the region. The Chinese, the North Koreans, very sensitive about U.S. military exercises. So look for less talk about all of that, more discreet, not talking about what these exercises, when exactly they're going to happen and what they're going to involve. But that may be risky military. Tonight, the U.S. intelligence community once again keeping close watch because there are very preliminary signs, multiple strategy in itself, because traditionally the U.S. military very much wants to talk about its exercises. It wants to put everybody on notice that when it is doing these exercises, especially near North Korea, it is simply for training, that there are no military operations in the works. And of course, the big unknown, this may be the new strategy, the new policy right now, but will President Trump adopt it, or will he engage in his own rhetoric about North Korea?